Millionaire publicly replaced pregnant wife with Mistress, but she had one more card to play. A hushed gasp swept through the glittering ballroom when Jonathan Harrington, famed millionaire magnate, made an announcement no one expected. He was leaving his pregnant wife, Isabella, in favor of his striking younger mistress, Clarissa Montague. Cameras flashed, capturing the heartbreak etched into Isabella's trembling features and the smug satisfaction on Clarissa's face. Onlookers couldn't decide what stunned them more, Jonathan's audacity in publicly discarding his expectant wife or Isabella's eerie calm in the wake of betrayal. Whispers of scandal and rumor echoed beneath the chandeliers, but little did anyone suspect that Isabella, quiet, refined, and utterly humiliated, still had one devastating card to play. Isabella Harrington, née Moretti, was born into a humble Italian family that prided itself on authenticity, warmth, and loyalty. She had grown up surrounded by the comforting aroma of fresh pasta sauce, the echo of laughter in cramped kitchens, and the gentle hum of the Tuscan countryside. When she was just 15, her parents immigrated to America, settling in New York, hopeful for a better future and more possibilities for their only daughter. Over time, Isabella adapted to the American way of life, embracing its fast pace while retaining the grace and unassuming charm of her heritage. Jonathan Harrington, by contrast, was a product of wealth, privilege, and relentless ambition. His father, Charles Harrington, had made a small fortune in real estate before Jonathan was born. Growing up in Manhattan's Upper East Side, Jonathan enjoyed every advantage life could offer: private tutors, expensive vacations, and a network of equally privileged friends. Yet, he was never content to rest on the laurels of his father's success. He wanted to carve his own path and outdo his father's legacy. His obsession with wealth and power made him relentless and, eventually, enormously successful. Their paths crossed in a most unexpected way at a non-profit gala in Brooklyn. Isabella, then 24, was volunteering as a translator for Italian artisans who had come to exhibit their craftsmanship. Jonathan, the freshly minted CEO of a tech solutions startup, had been dragged there by a colleague. The moment he saw Isabella moving with natural grace among the guests, exchanging pleasantries, her raven black hair swept into a loose bun, he was drawn to her. She was the most genuine person in that entire room, brimming with posturing socialites. The two fell in love swiftly. For Isabella, Jonathan's drive was awe-inspiring. He seemed so certain of his path. For Jonathan, Isabella offered something he never realized he needed: the comfort of unconditional love, untarnished by greed or ambition. Within a year, they were married. The wedding was a modest yet elegant affair, reflecting Isabella's preference for simplicity. Jonathan's father tried to intervene, wanting a grand extravaganza befitting the Harrington name. But Isabella, always sweet and persuasive, convinced him that genuine happiness lay in close-knit celebration. In the early years, their marriage was a vision of harmony. Jonathan's company soared, garnering major clients and forming alliances with powerful names in finance and industry. He even had a meeting once with the legendary Warren Buffett in Omaha, which he boasted about endlessly. Meanwhile, Isabella excelled at maintaining a warm and welcoming home, hosting intimate dinner parties for Jonathan's associates and traveling with him when his schedule permitted. Their synergy was enviable. She brought the heart, he brought the ambition. Whenever Jonathan launched into overdrive, working day and night, obsessed with new contracts, Isabella was his solace. She would stroke his hair at night, reminding him to sleep, to eat, to remember that life was more than numbers on a screen. He'd call her his anchor, and the sincerity in his voice illuminated the depth of his gratitude. Watching him fall asleep with the faint lines of worry etched on his brow, she often wondered if her love alone was enough to temper his ceaseless hunger for success. The pressures of corporate life grew, Jonathan was riding the wave of success, but also navigating a sea of sharks. Competitors emerged, each determined to take a bite out of Harrington Tech Solutions. As the stakes rose, so did Jonathan's ego. He started to see the world in terms of winners and losers, with no middle ground. While Isabella admired his drive, she slowly sensed a fraying at the edges of his humanity. When Jonathan was in his mid-30s, he caught the attention of influential venture capitalists who were enamored with his charming presence and track record. They infused his company with capital, fueling expansions into new territories: Silicon Valley, London, and Hong Kong. The brand Harrington Tech became synonymous with innovation. But as his empire expanded, Jonathan became less of the humble man Isabella had fallen in love with. Surrounded by yes men, flattery, and fame, he lost some of the grounding she'd provided. The late nights at the office turned into networking soirees, questionable dinners, and eventually a gateway to infidelity. Isabella noticed the change in his demeanor first, the dismissive tone, the restlessness at home. She never confronted him directly, always hoping it was just stress. It was around this time that Clarissa Montague stepped into their lives. She was introduced as the daughter of Lawrence Montague, one of Jonathan's early angel investors. Clarissa was beautiful, confident, and understood power plays like a second language. With an Ivy League education in business and a flair for seduction, she was used to getting her way. She sidled into Jonathan's professional world on the pretext of forging partnerships and quickly found her way into his personal life. Isabella suspected something was wrong. She would hear hushed phone calls, see text messages appear on Jonathan's phone at odd hours. His cold excuses, just business, Bella, or I'm too exhausted to talk, became more frequent. Still, Isabella tried to repair the unraveling tapestry of their marriage. She reminded herself of her vow to stand by him in sickness and in health, in good times and bad. She assured herself that, perhaps, once the next deal was sealed, Jonathan would find his way back to her. Eventually, she learned she was pregnant. Overjoyed, she believed this might be the miracle that would help them reconnect. She presented him with the news over a candlelit dinner. Instead of the unbridled excitement she expected, he offered a lukewarm response and promptly resumed checking stock updates on his phone. It stung, but she kept her tears at bay. The baby, she told herself, would become a reason for them to rediscover love. She could never have imagined that her pregnancy would set off the chain of events that culminated in the scandalous public betrayal, a betrayal that would rock New York's social circles and leave reporters drooling for a headline. Nor did she anticipate that in the face of heartbreak, she would uncover a strength and a hidden ace up her sleeve, capable of toppling even the mightiest empire. Isabella's pregnancy initially brought a fleeting sense of hope into the Harrington household. For a moment, Jonathan seemed slightly more attentive. He'd place his hand on Isabella's belly, curiosity mingling with uncertainty in his eyes. When she suffered morning sickness, he'd bring her toast and ginger tea, checking in on her before rushing to the office. Yet the tension between them lingered. Clarissa's presence weighed on their marriage like an invisible anchor, dragging them deeper into troubled waters. The changing dynamic didn't go unnoticed by Isabella's close friend, Lydia Santos. A free-spirited journalist with a knack for sniffing out secrets, Lydia had watched Jonathan's transformation with increasing alarm. She advised Isabella to be cautious, to protect her heart and finances. But Isabella, ever trusting, felt torn between the warnings of her friend and her loyalty to her husband. She confided in Lydia about the text messages, the sudden calls at midnight, the cryptic nights out. Lydia insisted, "He's hiding something, Bella. You have to investigate." Isabella hesitated. She feared what she might find. She dreaded the shame of a broken marriage. Above all, she worried about her unborn child growing up without a father's unwavering affection. A few weeks later, an industry conference took Jonathan to London. Clarissa, conveniently, had a meeting scheduled in the same city. Isabella tried to ignore the coincidence, but the day after Jonathan left, an article surfaced in a tabloid complete with blurred photos suggesting the two had been seen dining intimately at a luxury restaurant in Mayfair. Though the publication never named them outright, calling them mystery power players, Isabella recognized Clarissa's distinctive blonde waves and Jonathan's tall, confident silhouette. When Isabella confronted Jonathan upon his return, he brushed off the accusations, claiming the tabloids fabricated stories. "You know how these outlets operate, Bella. Anything for a sensational headline." He even had the gall to appear offended that she'd question him. Tired, pregnant, and emotionally taxed, Isabella accepted his explanation, if only to preserve her sanity. But the illusions shattered entirely when Isabella discovered a receipt for a diamond necklace from a high-end jeweler in London. It was not in her name. She found it tucked into one of Jonathan's suit pockets while sorting laundry. That night, lying awake in bed, she replayed every instance where he had slighted her, every time he had spoken about Clarissa with too much enthusiasm, every whispered phone conversation that ended abruptly when she walked into the room. There was no more room for doubt. Jonathan was having an affair. She wasn't the only one who discovered the truth. The rumor mill was abuzz in New York. A high-profile philanthropist, Thalia Kensington, hosted a charity brunch where Clarissa appeared on Jonathan's arm, though Isabella was conspicuously absent. Whispers raced through the crowd about the pregnant Mistress Harrington, overshadowed by this stunning, brazen other woman. It was a level of disrespect that made even seasoned socialites cringe. Upon hearing the gossip, Lydia confronted Jonathan privately, threatening to run a scathing expose if he continued to humiliate Isabella. Jonathan, indifferent to her threats, simply responded, "Print what you want. No one will believe you without proof." Then he added with a chilling finality, "And if you do, you'll regret it." The casual menace in his voice made Lydia's blood run cold. She realized Jonathan was no longer the kind-hearted man Isabella had married. He had become ruthless. One afternoon, Isabella received a phone call from an unknown number. On the other end, Clarissa Montague's silky voice purred, "Hello, Bella. I thought you deserved to know Jonathan and I are in love. He's going to leave you soon. Prepare yourself." Isabella's hands shook and bile rose in her throat. She wanted to slam the phone down, but Clarissa's arrogant tone kept her listening. "It's not personal," Clarissa said in a voice dripping with faux sympathy. "You just no longer fit into his life. Once the baby is born, we'll figure out child support and all that. But let's be honest, you've become an obstacle to his ambition." Rage erupted inside Isabella. She realized Clarissa was intentionally calling to rattle her. That night, she demanded Jonathan come home early. When he arrived, she confronted him again with tears in her eyes. "She called me. She told me everything. Why, Jonathan? Why are you doing this to me, doing this to us?" For the first time, she saw a crack in his composure. He lowered his head, fiddling with his cuffs as he replied in a cool yet uncertain tone, "Bella, we've grown apart. You wouldn't understand my world now. Clarissa does. She's aligned with my goals." She pressed her trembling hands against her stomach, hardly believing the words coming from the man she had once thought of as her soulmate. "We made a vow," she whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. He avoided her gaze, then mumbled, "I'm sorry," before leaving the room. The apology was empty, mechanical. It only confirmed how far gone he was. For a moment, Isabella felt her entire life collapsing. But then, an unexpected swell of resolve coursed through her. She was not the naive child who had come to America with nothing. She had become a Harrington, and with that name came resources and secrets. If Jonathan was discarding her so callously, she needed to protect herself, and she needed to protect her unborn child. Quietly, she reached out to her family lawyer, Antonio Rossi, a long-standing friend of her father's. She explained the situation, and he listened empathetically. "We'll find a way," he promised. Jonathan may be powerful, but he's not invincible. The next day, Isabella rifled through the mansion's study, searching for documents, anything that might reveal just how deeply Jonathan was entangled with Clarissa and how she might safeguard her own future. She had no idea that an even more treacherous betrayal was on the horizon, one that would take place in front of the world's cameras, making her heartbreak a public spectacle. Nor did she realize that beneath her quiet composure lay an unbreakable strength that would turn the tables in a way no one saw coming. The news broke on a Sunday morning. Jonathan Harrington, accompanied by Clarissa Montague, held a press conference outside Harrington Tech's newly opened headquarters. A throng of reporters and photographers jostled for space, surprised to see Jonathan addressing the media on a weekend without prior notice. Standing in front of the sleek, glass building, Jonathan looked composed, albeit tense. Clarissa stood next to him in a chic designer dress, her manicured hand resting possessively on his arm. Microphones were thrust forward as reporters demanded to know the reason for this sudden announcement. Jonathan cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming," he began, ignoring the shocked gasps when Clarissa angled her body closer to him. "I want to set the record straight. There have been rumors circulating about my personal life. Rumors about my marriage and my relationship with Miss Montague." He paused, his gaze drifting across the crowd. "Isabella and I are," he closed his eyes briefly. As though summoning courage, "we are parting ways. Our values and goals have diverged." Clarissa took this as her cue. "Jonathan and I share a vision," she declared softly, yet audibly enough for the microphones to catch. "We intend to work together to expand the Harrington brand globally, leveraging the Montague family's international connections." Isabella watched the live broadcast from home, frozen in horror. She was 7 months pregnant, alone in the vast living room. She had no idea that Jonathan planned to stage such a spectacle. Her cheeks burned as she listened to him speak of her as if she were merely a past business partner who no longer aligned with his goals. The cameras zoomed in on Clarissa's triumphant smile. A reporter shouted, "But what about your wife, Mr. Harrington? She's expecting your child." Another voice followed. "Does this mean you and Miss Montague are officially together? Are you planning to marry her?" Jonathan exchanged a knowing glance with Clarissa before replying, "Isabella will always be respected. I will ensure that she and our child are cared for financially. However, I must move forward, both personally and professionally." The callous finality of his statement sent ripples of shock through the crowd. The moment became even more appalling when Clarissa, brazenly stepping forward, slipped her arm around Jonathan's waist. Their message was clear. Isabella was out, Clarissa was in. Pandemonium erupted among the reporters. Their flashes lit up Jonathan's stoic face, while Clarissa smiled faintly, enjoying the scandalous attention. The press conference ended abruptly, with security ushering Jonathan and Clarissa inside the headquarters. Instantly, social media exploded with hashtags about #Harrington scandal, #wife replaced, and #Mistress unveiled. By evening, every major news outlet had a segment on the Harrington drama. Isabella sank onto the couch, her hands quivering over her swollen belly. Despite the heartbreak that threatened to crush her, a sudden wave of maternal protectiveness surged within. She pressed her palms around her abdomen, feeling the faint flutter of her baby's movements. She realized, in that moment, that she needed a plan. There was no time to be the hapless victim in Jonathan and Clarissa's storyline. Summoning her courage, she called Lydia. Her friend, outraged by the brazen public betrayal, arrived within the hour. "That snake," Lydia spat, pacing around the living room. "He made you look like baggage, Bella. What are you going to do?" Isabella swallowed the lump in her throat. "I need to protect my child's future," she said firmly. "I have to secure legal help, make sure my baby and I won't be cast aside once Jonathan fully embraces Clarissa." Her voice trembled, but her determination was unwavering. Lydia nodded. "Call Antonio Rossi. You also need to start gathering everything you can, financial records, correspondence, anything that proves Jonathan's wrongdoing. We can turn the tide in your favor." That same night, Isabella emailed Antonio. A swift reply came back: "We're on it. Remember, as Jonathan's wife, you have rights. He can't just cut you off." Encouraged by this, Isabella spent hours combing through desks, cabinets, even old computer files. She discovered documents that indicated Clarissa's father, Lawrence Montague, had orchestrated a shady deal with Jonathan. It involved offshore accounts, suspicious investments, and a potential conflict of interest within Harrington Tech's board. The more she uncovered, the more she realized that Jonathan's decision to publicly replace her wasn't just about love or lust. It was a calculated move to align with Montague money. The Montagues were rumored to be on the verge of inking a multi-billion-dollar international deal that would catapult Harrington Tech into new markets. Clarissa herself was the golden ticket to this synergy, and Jonathan, in typical fashion, was going after the bigger prize. Isabella felt a pang of heartbreak. Was she so disposable that he would trade their entire history for a financial empire? But heartbreak soon transformed into resolve. She wasn't going to let him bulldoze her life without consequence. She made an appointment with a forensic accountant recommended by Lydia, a bright young woman named Priya Patel, who specialized in uncovering hidden assets. Together, they started mapping out potential avenues to secure Isabella's position. That weekend, Lydia convinced Isabella to attend a charity luncheon at the Metropolitan Museum. "You need to be seen," Lydia insisted. "They threw you under the bus publicly. Now it's time for you to reclaim your narrative." At the event, Isabella's presence sparked a wave of whispers. She wore a demure yet elegant maternity dress, her chin held high despite the swirl of gossip around her. Many guests expressed sympathy, quietly condemning Jonathan's audacity. Others offered discreet greetings, unsure of how to address the elephant in the room, but Isabella maintained her composure, displaying a quiet strength. The media, lurking outside, snapped countless photos of her, alone and pregnant, yet poised. Headlines the next day read, "Miss Harrington surfaces with dignity." Behind her calm demeanor, Isabella was working tirelessly with Antonio and Priya. She learned that Jonathan's board position could be jeopardized by conflict of interest clauses if the Montagues' deals were found to be unethical. Moreover, she discovered a prenuptial agreement that Jonathan had insisted on before they married had a crucial clause. In the event of adultery proven by evidence, Isabella could leverage a significant claim, even partial ownership of certain assets. Jonathan, in his arrogance, never imagined she'd find the proof. Armed with mounting evidence, Isabella waited for her moment. She refused to confront Jonathan directly, choosing instead to let him believe she was powerless. Meanwhile, Clarissa paraded around town on Jonathan's arm, flaunting designer gowns and diamond jewelry. The tabloids devoured every scandalous detail. Yet, no one suspected that the seemingly timid and abandoned wife was the one orchestrating a carefully planned checkmate. As her 8th month of pregnancy approached, Isabella realized she needed to move swiftly. The birth of her child was imminent, and she wanted to ensure that when her baby arrived, they wouldn't be overshadowed or cast out by Jonathan's ruthless machinations. The days leading up to Isabella's due date were filled with calculated risk. With Lydia's guidance, Isabella leaked subtle rumors to the press, hinting at corporate improprieties within Harrington Tech. She remained anonymous, feeding bits of information through third parties, ensuring no trail led back to her. The media, always hungry for sensational stories, began digging deeper. Before long, financial blogs and even mainstream outlets started questioning the nature of Harrington Tech's expansions and its cozy ties to Montague International. In a separate maneuver, Priya Patel, the forensic accountant, traced a series of illicit transactions linking Montague International to offshore entities. These connections implied tax evasion, money laundering, or at the very least, questionable business ethics. Should the full scope of these revelations come to light, Jonathan and Lawrence Montague could face serious legal repercussions. When Jonathan caught wind of these rumors, he became furious. He suspected a corporate rival was trying to sabotage his imminent partnership with Montague International. Clarissa, equally vexed, demanded immediate damage control. Panicked crisis managers rushed to quell the speculation, issuing official statements that the Harrington-Montague partnership was transparent and fully compliant with international law. Yet, behind the scenes, Jonathan began to lose sleep, snapping at employees and withdrawing into private strategy sessions. Amid this corporate storm, Isabella continued her work quietly. She took solace in the rhythmic beating of her unborn child's heart during her checkups. The child had become her guiding light, a reminder of what she was fighting for. She was determined to bring her baby into a world where they were safe, secure, and not overshadowed by Jonathan's reckless ambitions. One evening, while Isabella was sorting through more documents, she stumbled upon a contract that indicated Clarissa had been hired as a consultant to Harrington Tech with an exorbitant monthly retainer. The arrangement began months before Isabella had even realized there was an affair. This consultancy was an obvious front, channeling funds directly to Clarissa. If proven, it would constitute corporate fraud, as Clarissa was not providing any legitimate service to the company. Isabella couldn't help but wonder about Clarissa's personal motivations. Did she truly love Jonathan, or was she merely seizing an opportunity to amass wealth and power? Perhaps it was both. Regardless, Clarissa's endgame might be marriage to Jonathan, tying herself to the Harrington name, guaranteeing she'd never be short of money or influence. But Isabella had a chance to disrupt that plan and shield her child from the consequences of Jonathan's destructive choices. The tension at Harrington Tech escalated. Employees whispered about an internal audit. HR staff exchanged worried glances whenever Clarissa strolled in wearing expensive heels, addressing the workforce with condescension. Board members started voicing concerns. Is Jonathan's leadership compromised by personal entanglements? Meanwhile, the Montagues, protective of their own reputation, grew uneasy about the swirling rumors of shady deals. They began questioning whether tying themselves too tightly to Jonathan Harrington was wise. Amid these corporate undercurrents, Jonathan and Clarissa maintained a flamboyant public facade. They attended galas together, hand in hand, enjoying front-page coverage in glossy magazines. The headlines, however, were increasingly skeptical: power or passion. The real story behind Harrington's new flame. Clarissa's carefully curated social media posts showed her life of luxury private jets, lavish hotels, exclusive parties. But none of the pictures mentioned Harrington Tech's sudden problems. Isabella's only genuine support during this tumultuous period came from Lydia and her small circle of trusted allies. Even her own parents remained in the dark about the extent of Jonathan's betrayal, as she wanted to spare them the anguish. Every time her mother called from Italy, worried about the pregnancy, Isabella reassured her that things were fine. Eventually, she planned to share everything, but not until her victory was certain. Then, one late afternoon, Isabella received a text from an unknown number. "I have information that will help you." Meet me at the Galleria Cafe at 5 p.m. She hesitated, heart pounding. Who could this be? Could it be a trap orchestrated by Clarissa or Jonathan to discover her plans? Curiosity and desperation for leverage won out. She informed Lydia and insisted on going with a discreet security detail. The cafe, located in a subdued corner of Manhattan, was a far cry from the glitzy spots Jonathan frequented. Clutching her handbag tightly, Isabella sat in a booth near a large painting of a sunlit orchard. Shortly, a man in a dark overcoat approached. He slid into the seat across from her, his face partially obscured by a low baseball cap. "I can't stay long," he said in a gravelly voice, "but you need to know that Montague International has been under investigation by international authorities for years. Alleged bribery, tax evasion, you name it. If Jonathan's partnership with them proceeds, he'll be dragged into a cesspool of legal trouble. There are documents, emails, bank records that prove it." Isabella's eyes widened. "Who are you?" "Someone who hates what they're doing," he answered, slipping a flash drive across the table. "This is everything I have. Use it wisely." Then he stood, heading for the exit without another word. Clutching the flash drive, Isabella felt both exhilaration and fear. This was precisely the kind of smoking gun she needed to bring down the Harrington-Montague alliance, potentially freeing Jonathan and, by extension, her future child from Clarissa's manipulative grasp. But it also meant she was delving into dangerous territory. If Montague International was under investigation, exposing them would bring a fierce backlash from powerful men: Lawrence Montague, his network of politicians, possibly criminals. Did she have the courage to face that? When she showed the drive to Lydia and Priya, they urged caution. "We have to verify the authenticity of these documents. If they're legitimate, you'll have more than enough to force Jonathan's hand," Priya cautioned. Lydia added, "But Montague won't go down without a fight. Be prepared." That night, Isabella paced the hallways of the Harrington mansion, her mind spinning with possibilities. She thought about the unborn baby in her womb, the future waiting for them both. She also thought about Jonathan's public betrayal, the humiliation, and the sorrow he had inflicted upon her. And yet, a small part of her still grieved the loss of the gentleman she once knew, the one who had fallen in love with her at that Brooklyn gala. Where had he gone? In that lonely mansion, with shadows dancing across marble floors, Isabella realized there was no turning back. She would use every ounce of evidence to protect her child and secure her own future. If Jonathan insisted on discarding her for a mistress and forging alliances with criminals, he would have to face the consequences of his actions. She would not remain the meek wife in the background. She would take a rightful place, armed with proof, and avenge the trust she had once freely given. In the days that followed, Isabella carefully orchestrated her next move. She enlisted Antonio Rossi to arrange a private meeting with Jonathan's legal counsel, signaling that she wanted to negotiate a civil, discreet resolution to their marital issues. The request wasn't entirely false. She did want a formal separation and guarantee of child support, but it was also a ploy to gauge Jonathan's next steps. When Jonathan's lawyer, a polished man named Malcolm Wright, showed up at Rossi's office, Isabella and Rossi politely pressed for details about Harrington Tech's finances. "We need clarity," Rossi explained calmly. "We must ensure that Mrs. Harrington's child is adequately provided for, given the father's public statements." Malcolm shifted in his chair, offering carefully curated information. He insisted Harrington Tech was flourishing, that Jonathan intended to be generous with child support, but only if Isabella agreed to sign a strict, non-disclosure agreement about Jonathan's personal and corporate affairs. It was a typical power play gag, her in exchange for financial security. But Isabella refused to commit, stating she'd need more time to review the terms. Leaving the meeting, Isabella felt shaken. Jonathan clearly intended to muzzle her. If she made any public allegations, especially about Montague International, he'd try to discredit her or cut her off financially. But Jonathan hadn't counted on the evidence she had. He believed she was still the docile wife who would cower under legal threats. That assumption would be his downfall. Over the next few weeks, an intricate web of events unfolded. Priya analyzed the flash drive meticulously, confirming the existence of bank transfers, emails, and internal memos implicating Montague International in corruption. Some of these implicated Jonathan's involvement at crucial junctures, though they didn't yet prove direct wrongdoing on his part. However, his willingness to merge with Montague International, despite ongoing investigations, could severely tarnish his reputation and lead to legal scrutiny. With the press already suspicious, it wouldn't take much to fan the flames into a full-blown inferno. Meanwhile, Clarissa continued flaunting her relationship with Jonathan, posting pictures from extravagant trips to exclusive resorts. Harrington Tech executives worried about negative publicity, but Jonathan quelled their concerns with promises of a global expansion once the Montague deal was finalized. It became clear that Jonathan was gambling everything on the Montague alliance. As Isabella entered her final month of pregnancy, her body grew heavy and fatigue set in. Yet, she pressed on, determined to time her revelations for maximum impact. She carefully coordinated with Lydia, who was prepared to break the story of the Montague scandal under the guise of an anonymous insider leak. Isabella also arranged for an emergency board meeting at Harrington Tech, one that she had the right to call, thanks to a little-known provision in their corporate bylaws granting immediate family of the majority shareholder the power to request a meeting in extraordinary circumstances. When news of the emergency board meeting reached Jonathan, he was livid. He confronted Isabella in the foyer of the mansion. It was the first time they'd spoken face-to-face in weeks. She was dressed in a loose, flowing maternity gown, her hair tied back. He looked at her with a mix of anger and bewilderment, as though seeing a stranger. "What are you doing, Bella?" he demanded, his voice echoing off the marble walls. "I agreed to provide for you and the child. There's no need to stir up trouble at the company." Isabella drew in a steadying breath. "I'm not stirring up trouble. I'm ensuring my child's future and the stability of the Harrington name you seem so intent on tarnishing." She tried to keep her voice level, despite the tightness in her chest. His eyes narrowed. "Don't play games with me. You can't possibly understand the complexities of these business deals." A spark of defiance flared in her gaze. "Funny how you assume I'm ignorant just because I haven't been flaunting my skills. You forget I studied economics before we married, and I've learned more from living with you than you realize. I know precisely what's going on with Montague International." Jonathan paled. "You're out of your depth, Bella. Leave this alone. Focus on your pregnancy." The chill in his voice reminded her of the man who had callously replaced her in public. Any nostalgia she might have had for their early years melted away. "I'm focusing on our child, Jonathan," she replied. "That's why I can't let this go." He left, slamming the door behind him. She sank onto the stairs, trembling from the confrontation. As tears threatened to spill, she placed a gentle hand on her belly. "Soon," she whispered to the unborn child, "we'll be free of this nightmare. I promise." Rain pattered against the windows of Harrington Tech's gleaming skyscraper as Isabella stepped into the lobby. She was 8 months pregnant, but her determination overshadowed any discomfort. An emergency board meeting, one she had invoked, was about to take place in the top-floor conference room. Security guards, alerted by a hastily circulated memo, stood watch. Their stern gazes followed as she made her way toward the private elevators. Inside the elevator, her friend Lydia quietly squeezed her hand. "Are you sure you're up for this?" Lydia asked. Isabella inhaled deeply. "I have to be," she replied. "For my baby and for the truth." The boardroom doors were tall and made of frosted glass, revealing only blurred silhouettes inside. Isabella's lawyer, Antonio Rossi, was already waiting in the corridor. His face bore a concerned look, but he greeted her with a reassuring nod. "Let's do this," she said, gently touching her rounded belly. They entered to find Jonathan Harrington at the head of a polished oval table. He wore a sharp suit, though his eyes were ringed with sleeplessness. At his side, Clarissa Montague sat with her arms folded, exuding a tense confidence. Around them, a dozen board members murmured anxiously, shuffling papers and exchanging apprehensive glances. No one quite understood why the seldom-seen Miss S. Harrington had requested this extraordinary gathering. Jonathan tapped his pen on the table. "Isabella," he began, voice taut, "this meeting is highly irregular. Would you explain why we're here?" Isabella glanced at Antonio. He distributed thick folders to each board member. Inside, Antonio said, "You'll find documentation that demands immediate attention." The room fell silent as people flipped through pages of financial data, emails, and meeting transcripts. Isabella had spent weeks compiling these files with the help of a forensic accountant. The documents showed how Montague International, owned by Clarissa's father, had been shifting funds into offshore accounts and paying substantial consultancy fees directly to Clarissa, purportedly via Harrington Tech. One of the board members, a silver-haired woman named Renata Monroe, frowned. "These payments look suspicious," she said. "Consulting fees this high are unusual without itemized deliverables." Isabella nodded. "That's the first red flag. If you keep reading, you'll see more." The next section detailed emails suggesting possible bribery of foreign officials by Montague International. Though it wasn't conclusively tied to Harrington Tech yet, the arrangement Jonathan had been championing aligned them so closely with Montague's operations that any legal fallout would inevitably spill onto Harrington Tech's reputation. Clarissa's cheeks reddened. "I've never seen these emails," she insisted, but her voice trembled. Jonathan, on the other hand, maintained a rigid calm, though a flicker of alarm passed behind his eyes. "Montague International has been under investigation for years," Isabella pressed on. "Jonathan either didn't bother to do the due diligence or chose to ignore what he found. Either way, he risked dragging Harrington Tech into unethical, possibly illegal dealings." A low hum of shock and concern rumbled among the board. Several flipped to the final pages, where a conflict of interest clause from the company's bylaws was highlighted. Isabella had called this meeting under the rarely used provision that allowed an immediate family member of the majority shareholder to request a review if they believed corruption threatened the company's stability. Jonathan stood abruptly, fixing Isabella with a steely gaze. "You're doing this out of spite," he accused. "You want revenge because I left you." She cut him off, her voice surprisingly calm. "You left me publicly, Jonathan. You humiliated me. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I won't let the father of my child destroy the company he built by plunging it into illegal schemes." He opened his mouth to retort, but a board member, a reserved man in his 60s, raised his hand. "Mr. Harrington, these accusations are serious. We've been hearing rumors about Montague International's ethics for months. If this is true, it could devastate our stock prices, not to mention our credibility." Clarissa interjected. "This is a smear campaign. Isabella has no proof these emails are real." Antonio responded, "Everything has been verified by an independent forensic team. Should we need to, we can present it in court." Tension mounted as Isabella pressed a button on the conference room's sleek panel, projecting a series of incriminating messages onto a large screen. One email included a note from Clarissa referencing untraced funds for expediting negotiations in Asia. Another showed Montague International's executives discussing how to keep Harrington Tech's board unaware of certain liabilities. A wave of dismay swept the board members. Voices overlapped in anxious debate, some demanding more details, others insisting on immediate action. Jonathan glared at Isabella. "You're ruining everything we've built," he muttered under his breath. "I'm saving it from you," she replied gently. The baby kicked, as if in agreement. Finally, Henry Blackwood, the board's chairman, stood. His crisp suit and silver hair gave him a commanding presence. "We cannot ignore these documents," he announced. "If Montague International is under investigation, and if these payments to Miss Montague were made without proper oversight, Harrington Tech must suspend any partnership negotiations immediately." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "We're on the verge of the biggest global expansion this company has ever seen. If we back out now, we'll lose the Montague funding." Henry held up a hand. "Losing that funding is preferable to losing everything to a corruption scandal. Our shareholders will expect us to act responsibly. For the moment, Jonathan, consider the Montague deal frozen." Clarissa let out a frustrated hiss. The board members quietly nodded in agreement with Henry's pronouncement. An even more critical matter loomed: Jonathan's role. Isabella turned to the relevant section of the bylaws. Under this clause, she began, "The board has grounds to remove or suspend a CEO if he or she knowingly engages in unethical conduct or jeopardizes the company's integrity." Jonathan looked stunned. "You're proposing to remove me?" She met his gaze. "You forced my hand." A flurry of whispers spread around the table. Finally, Henry spoke again, his tone heavy. "Ladies and gentlemen, we need to decide whether to launch a formal investigation into this matter. If so, Jonathan's position as CEO must be suspended during the inquiry." Jonathan's eyes blazed. "You can't do this," he warned, his voice quivering with anger. Yet the board members, disturbed by the evidence, found themselves with little choice. One by one, they raised their hands in favor of a temporary removal, culminating in a majority decision. Jonathan stared at them in disbelief, his authority unraveling in a matter of minutes. Security was called to escort Clarissa out when she erupted in protest, shouting that the accusations were fabricated. Her shrill voice echoed in the corridors, fading only as the doors slid shut behind her. Jonathan, though not forcibly removed, stood seething. He seemed unable to meet Isabella's eyes. She felt the baby shift inside her, a tangible reminder of why she'd endured such turmoil. Jonathan finally confronted her, his words low. "You'll regret this, Bella." Isabella's expression was resolute, though sadness flickered behind her eyes. "I regret that you chose ambition and betrayal over your family. But I won't regret protecting my child and Harrington Tech from corruption." He said nothing else, only turned on his heel and stormed out, leaving the boardroom in disarray. Some members hurried to contain the crisis, strategizing damage control and press statements. Others offered Isabella tentative smiles of gratitude for stepping up. Antonio touched her shoulder. "You did the right thing," he murmured. Isabella let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I hope so, but right now I'm just relieved it's over." She glanced around at the emptying boardroom. The seat Jonathan had once occupied at its head stood vacant, a powerful symbol of how quickly fortunes could change. The company's future was uncertain, but at least it wasn't barreling toward disaster under Montague's shadow. For Isabella, it felt like a small victory, one born of necessity, forged by heartbreak, but sealed in unwavering resolve. As she and Lydia stepped back into the corridor, the rain still fell against the vast windows, a fitting backdrop to a day that had swept away the illusions Jonathan constructed. Isabella placed a hand on her belly again, silently reminding herself that this was the beginning of something new for herself and for the life growing inside her. The fallout from the emergency board meeting was immediate. Financial analysts proclaimed it the swiftest toppling of a tech titan in recent memory. Stock prices wobbled as investors scrambled for clarity on the scandal. Media outlets unleashed a torrent of stories about Jonathan's misconduct, Clarissa's shady consultancy fees, and the broader Montague international investigation. Jonathan was forced to issue a statement through his attorneys, claiming he had no direct knowledge of Montague's illegal activities, a weak defense at best. Clarissa vanished from the public eye. Unsubstantiated rumors suggested she fled to Europe with a healthy payout from her father, while some tabloids speculated she was trying to cling to Jonathan behind closed doors. None of that mattered to Isabella anymore. She had taken her stand. In the weeks that followed, Harrington Tech began a major restructuring. The board instated an interim CEO, a veteran executive who promised transparency and reform. As the dust settled, it became apparent that Isabella had inadvertently saved the company from a catastrophic partnership. Shareholders began to view her not as the spurned wife, but as the courageous whistleblower who acted just in time. Meanwhile, Isabella prepared for motherhood. Despite the stress and heartbreak, she found solace in quiet moments, reading baby books and listening to classical music in the nursery she had decorated herself. Lydia visited often, bringing comfort foods and updates on the shifting social scene. "Everyone is talking about how you brought Jonathan to his knees," Lydia said with a proud grin. Isabella only shook her head. She found no joy in revenge. She had done what she felt was necessary to protect her child and, ironically, even to protect Jonathan's company from his own worst instincts. One crisp autumn morning, Isabella went into labor. Lydia rushed her to the hospital, where she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. She named him Luca Charles Harrington, honoring both her Italian roots and Jonathan's father, who had once shown her kindness in the early days of her marriage. Overcome with emotion, Isabella held the tiny life in her arms, tears of gratitude streaming down her face. Jonathan, informed belatedly by hospital staff, arrived hours later. He stood awkwardly at the door, eyes flickering between Isabella and the baby. He looked worn, the scandal having taken its toll, dark circles under his eyes, hair disheveled. When he finally stepped forward, Luca stirred, as if sensing a presence that was both familiar and strange. "Bella," Jonathan began, voice hoarse. May I hold him?" She hesitated, recalling his public betrayal, the months of torment. But Luca had the right to know his father. Carefully she placed the newborn in Jonathan's arms. He cradled the small bundle, his stern features softening as he gazed into his son's face. Isabella watched a flurry of emotions cross his eyes: regret, wonder, perhaps a glimmer of love. He seemed to forget about everything else in that moment. But Isabella hadn't forgotten. After a lingering silence, Jonathan cleared his throat, handing the baby back gently. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said quietly, "but I'm sorry." For the first time, Isabella heard sincerity in his voice, but it did little to mend the deep wound in her heart. She spoke softly, not wanting to disturb the sleeping infant in her arms. "Jonathan, you turned our lives upside down. You humiliated me in front of the world, and you nearly destroyed Harrington Tech. I did what I had to do to protect our child and myself." He looked down, unable to meet her gaze. After a brief pause, she added, "We can discuss co-parenting arrangements through my attorney." He nodded, eyes damp. She sensed a part of him wanted to beg for a second chance. But the gap between them was insurmountable. The heartbreak couldn't be undone by a single moment of remorse. "Take care of him," he whispered, then quietly left. In the aftermath, Isabella devoted herself to motherhood, cherishing every coo and gurgle from baby Luca. Legal proceedings for the divorce commenced smoothly. Jonathan, eager to avoid further scandal, granted her generous terms, including a substantial trust fund for Luca, the mansion, and a stake in Harrington Tech. Though it was a fraction of his former wealth, it was enough for Isabella to raise her child comfortably, independent of Jonathan's whims. The press eventually moved on to newer scandals, but the tale of the millionaire who replaced his pregnant wife, only for her to topple his empire, became something of a cautionary urban legend. Privately, Isabella felt relief more than triumph. She had escaped Jonathan's shadow and secured her child's future. She never wanted to revel in vengeance. She only sought fairness, respect, and a home free from deceit. As the seasons changed, she often walked with Luca through Central Park, reflecting on how far she'd come. She had journeyed from a young Italian immigrant to the poised wife of a millionaire, then to a betrayed woman who refused to be a victim. Against all odds, she emerged strong, independent, and determined to give her son the life he deserved. For Isabella, that was her final victory, one far sweeter than any corporate triumph. Scandal, betrayal, and triumph. Isabella's journey reveals how a quiet strength can shatter even the mightiest illusions. Once abandoned and shamed, she rose to protect the future she cherished most, her child, Luca. By exposing corruption within Harrington Tech and severing the toxic ties of her marriage, Isabella reshaped her own destiny. She never intended to become a hero in the public eye, but her resolve spoke louder than scandalous headlines. Now, free from Jonathan's ruthless ambitions, she has embraced a second chance for genuine happiness. The scars remain, but they stand as proof of her resilience. If you found her story inspiring, share it with friends, leave a comment on the biggest twist that took you by surprise, and subscribe for more incredible life dramas. You never know who might need a reminder that even the most formidable challenges can be toppled by unwavering resolve and one final card played.